Of Marcus Moench of ISET, talking about thresholds and tipping points.
That's right. Yeah, the threshold for a good presentation. So I've worked mostly across Asia and a lot on urban climate risk, a lot on urban adaptation. And ours is really focusing on questions of thresholds and tipping points. And it's partially starting with a view, hopefully very fuzzy, because we've all got a fuzzy view of Boulder, of what those urban systems are. The fact that a lot of what we call urban systems extend way beyond our boundaries, and that's where a lot of our risk comes from. So it's the sorts of things, there was a previous picture that was on my street, this one's just up the street, where we run into the flood risks and the things that we're talking about, and we're thinking, is Boulder really resilient? Where is the tipping point? Where is the threshold where we know we can bounce from? On the other hand, if you just move a few feet down that same street the same day, what happens when you hit the tipping point on the transport system, when the things don't work, and what's the fragility? And here, some of our work in Asia comes in a lot, and the question of we have these stacked systems. We know if the power fails, then all our communications go out, all our water goes out, other things. And so understanding this relationship between the basic systems that have thresholds and critical things and the ones up above that are where adaptive capacity lies, that's the question. What are those thresholds? What are the things that will get us to change? Where do things tip? So come on, next one. And what are those tipping points? So, and my interest in this tipping point question is not just about where are the things going to fail, but where do we get the tipping point socially, where we change, whether it's the question of local food, whether it's the question of responding to floods and fires, and the question of the AMA, and how did that come up and become a real strong movement, the Intermountain Alliance. That's a tipping point when we have those experiences. What about brittle power? This is what James Newcomb from RMI is going to be talking about. The fragilities in our power system. And the question of if there is a fragility there and everything goes out, what happens? What happens to our social networks and others? And this is grabbed off the BOCO Strong website, but it's a critical question of what do you need to get communities together. So we're looking at thresholds and tipping points, not just from the question of where do you get the failures, but where do you get the ability to have capacity and respond. What we did in Asia was used a shared learning process and saw that events over time and things like that led to the ability to act and to build up. But when you talk to another person who's going to be talking at this, Bruce Goldstein, he's talking about networks, and that he has a very similar framework where the interaction of networks builds up and creates a tipping point where you actually get transformation in society. So we can talk about the thresholds and tipping points in terms of transforming knowledge and practice, transforming the relationships, transforming our systems and institutions. Those are the key things where if you're taking it from the background and you're saying, what's the future today? There's that Boulder, this was actually taken today from up above where we live. But where we have that hazy future, what's the view forward? And the view forward is somewhat about those physical systems and the impacts. But it's also about what we can change, and it's the tipping point in that. So one of the questions we really want to ask is, for Boulder, what are the tipping points that can get us to have a different perspective? Is this something that can be an example for other? So when we look at all the risks, we look at the patterns, we want to explore those thresholds and tipping points, both from that risk perspective. Building up, Karen McClune will be talking about these specific examples out of Boulder from the floods and fires, but towards the future. So what have we learned from these past disasters? What do we know out of history of disasters globally, but out of the fires, out of the floods? What have we learned there about change? What are the threats and risks that we are really not considering? And I think Jim's talk will probably hit very hard on the question of the power system. If you get a real kick on that, the cascades there. We saw the cascades in the water system, but if you have the cascades in the power system. And what are the questions for the institutions and networks that might help us transform that? How do we really think and say, okay, we're in a complex urban system. Where do we go? How do we transform that? And is that a question of institutions, relationships, and so on? So we're 3:30 to 5 p.m. It's going to be 5 to 10 minute talks, but lots of time for dialogue around this. Thresholds and tipping points, that's the advertising. Please come.
Thank you very much.